Good morning, everybody. Wow, you guys are asleep already. I haven't even started yet. Good morning, everybody. There we go. It's great to be here this morning. I had coffee with Russ last Monday. Told me that he was going to be gone for a few weeks and that Stephen had been suffering from some concussion syndrome or concussion symptoms. So I made. You ever make one of those kind of kind gestures that you really don't mean, like I said, if Stephen's having a problem, I could fill in for him, and you don't expect them to take you up on it. Those kind of kindness that you, anyways, here I am. No, I'm excited to be here. Just for a moment before I begin, I just want to encourage you, knowing a little, being good friends with Stephen and knowing a little bit about where you guys are at right now and the announcement this morning, I've been there. I've been on staff when a senior pastor has resigned, and a couple times actually, and so I know a little bit of what you're going through and about to go through. And if I could encourage you this morning to really be praying for your church and praying for the staff, especially as they have to take on extra loads and stuff, and during this time of transition, and praying for your elders board and of course your search committee, that you guys would be, as a church, would be faithful in listening to what God's calling you to and leading you towards. And so, just if I could encourage you just to be praying your guts out for your church right now, and that all would go well. I have a 12-year-old son, Easton, and he, this week on Thursday, he got a new app for his iPod, and he was pretty stoked about it. And it was a superhero game, and he's a big comic book, into comic books and superheroes and stuff, as most of you know, those are referred to as geeks. And so my geek son, he got this new superhero game, and he was playing, and he was sitting on the couch on Thursday, and he was playing this game, and he was. They give you about 3 superheroes to begin with, and then as you go on in the game, you can unlock more superheroes, and you can play as these heroes, and of course all the cooler heroes. It takes you a while to get through the game to unlock these heroes and be able to play as them. And so he was looking at it, and the very first superhero that you could unlock cost 30,000 pieces of gold. And so he was playing the game, and after the first few times, he noticed that each time that he plays the game, he gains about 200 pieces of gold. And so he says to me, he's like, Dad, I was just thinking about it. If I have to get 30,000 pieces of gold just to buy the very first superhero in this game, and I'm only getting 200 per game, that means I have to play this game 150 times just to get the first superhero. And for those of you that are against video games, I am no longer against games, because he used math skills right there. Did you notice that? Some reasoning skills, some time management skills, right? And just to let you know, give you an update on yesterday, Saturday, he had already bought his first hero and was on to the next one, which maybe is a comment of poor parenting on our part, but you know what though? To him, right? He loves superheroes, right? He loves comic books, he loves the superhero movies, and he loves the superhero games. And so for him, it wasn't a big deal. Like, I couldn't imagine playing something 150 times just to sort of get into the first level almost, But to him, it didn't matter. He was willing to put all that time and effort, because that was important to him. That was valuable to him. My mom called me the other day. She right now is in Toronto area and visiting my grandfather. He turns 92 in a couple months, and she's visiting him because he was driving. You're with me already, right? He was driving over to see my grandma. She's currently in a separate care home than he is, which is kind of unfortunate. But so he drives over at age 92 to see my 92-year-old grandmother. And as he's getting out of the car, he puts his walker, another great part to the driving story, but he puts his walker down, and it slipped in the ice, and he fell, and he broke his hip, unfortunately. And so my mom is there right now. But my grandfather loves to tell the story of when he was in his early 20s, and he had met my grandmother. And he would work all week long. And on Friday, when he got off his shift, he would get on his bicycle, and they lived in the Netherlands at this time, and he would get on his bicycle, and he would ride his bike for 6 hours, halfway across the country, just to go see my grandmother. Isn't that crazy? Like, who would do that for a girl? And he said that if it was cold and raining, he would take newspaper and he would stuff newspaper in his pants just to keep him warm. Like, that's crazy. That is crazy that he would go through that. But to him, it wasn't at all. He loved my grandmother. He knew that he wanted to marry. She was so important, so valuable to her that he thought nothing of getting on his bicycle and riding Friday after work, go see my grandma all day Saturday, and then ride back 6 hours to be at work Sunday morning. He thought nothing of that to go see her. You know, on the side, I work as T-shirt security at Credit Union Center, doing concerts, and it's a great little gig. You get to see concerts for free, and it's kind of fun. And a little over a year ago, the band Pearl Jam came through. And any Pearl Jam fans? No? Okay. No? Lauren? No? All right. Not you, Striper, right? Petra? Yeah, there we go. You still have some yellow and black spandex at home, don't you? The Striper days. So anyways, Pearl Jam comes through. And what was interesting, before the show, we get all the security guys together and they talked to us a little bit about what's going to happen. And they said to us, listen, just so you guys know, the first 4 or 5 rows are all designated seating. They have about 200 seats, 200 tickets that they reserve at the front of every one of their concerts, and they are for their fan club people that follow them across the country to every concert. The same 200 people start with them in Vancouver and go every night all the way across the country, and people do that in the United States. They will follow them all tour long every night. Isn't that insane? Like, I mean, there's some bands that I would love to see a couple times, but to see them every night for an entire tour? Can you imagine how much that would cost, just the tickets alone, let alone travel and hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff involved? And yet people do that, and that's as common. Every time Pearl Jam goes on tour, they have these people that follow them across. But to these people, as crazy as it sounds to us, to these people, that's important to them. They're willing to take the time and the effort and the money and get time off of work and everything that they need to do to be able to follow their favorite band across the country. And the rest of us, that just seems silly, doesn't it? What a waste. But I'm sure every person in this room probably has something like that in their life. You know, some kind of interest or hobby or something that you're just passionate about, that you're willing, you put in a lot of time, that you put in a lot of effort, you probably put in a lot of finances in order for you to be a part of this thing or to experience that thing. Is that probably true? You know, and the rest of us probably look at whatever that is in your life and think that you're crazy. That you're willing to put all much, because to us it's not really that important, but to you, that thing is valuable. That thing is really worth your time and your effort. There's a story in Mark chapter 14 that falls along what we're talking about this morning. Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 3. It says this: while he, Jesus, was in Bethany reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came in with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar of perfume and poured it on Jesus' head. Some of those who were present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? At the very least, it could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," Jesus said. "Why are you bothering her? For she has done a beautiful thing to me." You know, it's kind of a crazy story, isn't it? I mean, Jesus is hanging out with some friends at this party, and then this woman walks in and dumps perfume on his head. It's just kind of strange. Well, in order for us to really kind of grasp or understand the story, we have to go back and look at the context of it as well. You see, there was some crazy things going on that makes this story extremely significant. First of all, we know that historically during that time, that the women were, of course, looked at, unfortunately, as being less than men. And so, in that scenario, this story we're reading, there wouldn't be any women hanging out in that room with the men, especially when one of the men was considered a rabbi teacher. You know, they would have been the ones that have prepared the party, got it ready, got the food ready, served it, and then retreated to probably a different area of the house or outside. So that's the scenario, right? A bunch of these guys hanging out in this room, and then this woman walks into this room, into this place where culturally she was not supposed to be. Like, you could just imagine, right? I mean, the men just were like, what, like the hair on their neck standing up. This suddenly became a very tense and awkward situation that this woman would be willing to walk into. That is crazy brave on her part. She walks into this room and she takes this bottle of perfume and dumps it on Jesus. And now Jesus is sitting there smelling like a high school boy with Axe all over him. Right? Now, the interesting part about that part of the story, okay? We're not talking perfume, the latest celebrity perfume from Shoppers Drug Mart, like the new Bieber or the J-Lo juice or whatever the new perfume is, right? We're not talking that. We're talking a family heirloom, okay? We're talking this bottle of perfume that had been given to her by her mother, okay? And that probably had been given to her mother by her grandmother, and been given to her grandmother by her great-grandmother. This thing was an expensive, highly valuable heirloom that had been passed down to her, because in that culture, if something tragic were to happen, if her husband were to die or to divorce her, and if her family didn't take her in, she would have nothing to take care of her. She would have no one to take care of her and her family. And so this was a precious sentimental heirloom that a mother would pass on her daughter, knowing that this was so valuable that if anything tragic or terrible ever happened to her daughter, that this would be able to take care of her and her family. Do you understand now what's going on? This is crazy that she would walk in with this thing and break it and dump it on Jesus and waste it like that. And I love the disciples in this story. Sometimes we look at the disciples and we think they're a bunch of buffoons, hey? The stuff they say, sometimes you're like, what a bunch of morons. I can't believe Jesus hung out with those guys. I think the disciples are a lot more like us than we give them credit for. If you were sitting there, knowing the value of this heirloom, this perfume, and she just breaks it and pours the whole thing out on Jesus, I think the disciples responded kind of appropriately, don't you? They're like, what a waste. I can't believe you did that. At the very least, you could have sold this and given that money to the poor. We see there, it says right in there that this was worth over a year's wages. That's how much this thing was worth. It's tax season right now. Anybody done your taxes already? Yeah? Wow, way more than the first service. You guys are on the ball. But you got your T4 recently, didn't you? Yeah? For those of you working? Got your T4. You see it right there. It says right there how much you made this past year. Anybody like me and look at that total and say, wow, where did that go? So you see an entire year's wage. Could you imagine just taking that entire amount, no matter what it is, it's still a year's of value to you and what you do for a living. Taking that and just breaking it and pouring it out and wasting it. An entire year. Could you imagine doing that? I don't think you could. I don't think we could. Your neighbor comes to you and says, hey, we've been saving and saving and saving for years for retirement, and we're about to retire in a year, but we've decided to take all that retirement saving recently, and we've got this organization over in Cambodia that we believe strongly in, so we've just given it all to them. We have nothing now. What would you say to your neighbor? For those of you in college, if your parents had a college fund for you, all of a sudden came to you just before you started school, yeah, we gave it away. Or are you saying to your parents, I've saved up this money for college, I've been working hard, I've decided I'm not going to go, I gave it all away. This is a crazy story, a crazy situation. And then Jesus chimes in after the disciples are rebuking her for what she's done and the waste of this. And he says, hey, stop bothering her. She has done a beautiful thing to me. She has done a beautiful thing to me. A little over a year and a half ago, my wife and I, we kind of were in this unique situation. I had just resigned at the church that I was at, and my wife was kind of at the tail end of where she was working, and she had a new job, but it wasn't starting for a few months down the road. So we thought our boys, we have two boys, at the time they were 10 and 13, and we thought, well, they're old enough that we could probably, they'd be safe and would understand what we're doing, and young enough that we can have some time with them, that we're not interfering with sports or school or whatever. And so what we decided to do is we took them out of school, and we went to Africa for 4 months and volunteered with an organization over there. And it was just this fabulous, remarkable time that we had in our lives with our boys. And I purposely, before the trip, I asked him a question, and I wanted to ask him again at the end of the trip just to kind of see. But before we went on the trip, when we were getting ready, I said to the boys, I said, hey, what if Mom and I won the lottery right now? What if we won the lottery and I gave you $1 million? What would you do with it? And my oldest boy right away, boom, he was like, oh, I'd get this Lamborghini, blah, 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 and this, all these cars that I'd never even heard of, because he's kind of a car kind of buff guy, and he's like, oh yeah, he'd spend that $1 million on one car easily, just like that. He knew exactly which car, it cost $1 million, boom, gone. No problem, it'd be awesome. And then my other son, the younger one, of course, he's like, oh, I'd go to Comic-Con, And for those of you who don't know what Comic-Con is, it's like a big convention for geeks. That's what it is. And he'd blow the whole thing just on toys and costumes for, at Comic-Con. No problem, right? And so anyways, we went over to Africa, and we spent, like I said, 4 months there volunteering in Zambia and Zimbabwe, and just had this remarkable time. And the boys saw and experienced some incredible things, and we spent our days at feeding centers, and the boys would be cooking food all day over an open fire and serving it to children, where that was the only meal that they would have for the entire week for some of them, and it was tragic. And the boys would be serving food, and then we'd do home visits and go check up on these kids in their homes, in these tiny huts, and just making sure that they're being taken care of, and that they're taking their medicine if they have some, and making sure that they're doing all right, because most of them were living on their own without parents or in a child-led household and stuff. And so our boys saw a lot of things like, far stages of AIDS and kids that just weren't even coherent to our visits and stuff, and kids being hungry and stuff. And it had impacted them deeply, of course, as you can imagine. And on the flight home, I asked the boys, I said, hey, what if your mom and I won the lottery when we got back, and I gave you $1 million? What would you do with it? Well, they're still only 12 and 13 years old, so we got to be a little bit understanding here, right? But my oldest, he still would buy a car, but this time it would be only more in the $40,000 or $50,000 range, rather than $1 million car. But he had all these other things that he would do with the money. It was very interesting. The organization that we were with in Africa, there was a bunch of it that he would give to them. And the feeding centers that survive only on the donations by other people, that feed these kids the only food they get, he would give some to them. And it was really interesting. And our youngest one, I said, what would you do? And he's like, well, I'd still go to Comic-Con. He wouldn't buy as many costumes and toys, but the same thing. He was like, I'd give a bunch of it over to Africa, and I would give to this project that we saw over there, and to this family over there and stuff. When we got home, we never said anything to our kids, and just on their own, they decided they get a monthly allowance, and just on their own, without us saying anything, every month that we give them an allowance, they take out 10% or even more most of the time, and they started a little bucket in our pantry that they put in there, and then money goes to that organization we were with. It's why the change though? What would make them go from wanting $1 million just to spend on one car, to where they would be willing to give the vast majority of that away to those in need? Well, it's because they were there and they saw that, right? They experienced it, and it changed their paradigm. And now suddenly the things that they thought were important and the things that they valued, that changed. And what they saw and what was being done over there had a massive impact on their life. In this story of this woman who would dump this perfume, you see, if we flip over to John chapter 12, where the same story, we find out who this woman is. This woman is Mary, not Jesus' mother Mary, but Mary and Martha Mary. And Mary and Martha Mary had a brother. Do you remember who their brother was? It was Lazarus. And do you remember what happened? You remember the story of Lazarus, right? So here's this woman who Jesus had rescued her and saved her from the life that she was living. And then on top of that, had brought her very own brother back to life who had died. That Mary is this woman in the story. This Mary who the impact of Jesus in her life and the change in her life, he had now so important, so valuable. How do you say thank you? How do you say thank you to someone who's brought your brother back to life? How do you say thank you to someone who saved you from the way you were living? So words are not enough sometimes. And so she came up with the biggest thing that she could think of. The most outlandish, extravagant thing that she could possibly think of, way of saying thanks. She took this precious family passed down heirloom and poured it over Jesus. And then Jesus' response to that was, no, that's not a waste. He said, she has done a beautiful thing to me. If we flip over 2 chapters from Mark 14 to Mark 12, we find Jesus in another story. And he's sitting at the back of the church. And in Mark chapter 12, it says this: Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offering was and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into this treasury than all the others." It's interesting, isn't it? We have this elderly woman who has barely a penny to give. And Jesus is super excited about it. And he's like, "Did you see that, you guys? That was awesome." And over here we've got this woman who dumped this crazy, expensive, extravagant perfume over Jesus. And he said, "You see that, guys? That was awesome." And somewhere between the story of a woman with barely a penny and this woman who gave more than we could imagine, somewhere in the middle here, we have to ask ourselves, of what worth is Christ to us and our lives? Of what value, importance is Christ truly to our lives? Now, before you think this is going to be a message about tithing. It's not, because it's never been about money. These stories are not about money. It's always been about the attitude of our hearts. It's always been about the attitude of our hearts and the way that we live our lives. Those are the ways that show things that are valuable and of worth to us. Let me ask you a question. Suppose I cut a piece of my hair off. Just had a lock of my hair, and I came down and I said to you, I'd like to sell this to you. How much would you give me for a chunk of my hair? Honestly, how much would you give me for a chunk of my hair? 25 cents. 25 cents. Wow. Last service I got $1. 25 cents. Yeah. No, seriously. What would you give me? Probably nothing, right? Let's be honest. Nothing. You think I'm just stupid for even wanting you to pay for my hair. Right? You could go to any barbershop in town and they would probably pay you to take the hair out of their store for them, right? Well, what if that piece of hair belonged to this person right here on this slide? That is Elvis Presley, by the way. He's referred to as the king of rock and roll. Well, recently at auction, a lock of Elvis's hair sold for $115,000. $115,000. Anybody here think that's crazy? Anybody think that's a little nut bar? Anybody here would actually do that? Okay. Didn't want to offend any Elvis fans. But to that person, as crazy as that sounds, to that person, they love Elvis. This was valuable to them. That was worth their money to them. What if I said I had a really nice white dress for you that looked like this, that I wanted to sell you? How much would you give me for that dress, for a nice dress like that? How much would that cost you? $50? $100? What'd you say? It's a nice dress though, right? I'd wear it. Well, what if I told you, though, that dress was worn by Marilyn Monroe? Not only worn by her, but that was the one she was wearing. She was a part of a very famous moment in history where she sang, "Happy birthday, Mr. President." You know that? Remember that? Well, this dress went for $1.3 million. Million with an M. $1.3 million for a dress that I'm pretty sure the buyer is probably not going to wear. Right? That's crazy. Never do that. But to them, that was worth it. That was valuable to them. What's the next picture? Ah, yes. Any dog lovers? Any animal lovers here? Huh? This is a red Tibetan Mastiff. Pretty dog, hey? How much would you probably pay for a dog like that? Anybody bought a dog recently? Couple hundred? 500? 1,000 if it's a really nice breed? Well, this little gaffer, he went for $1.6 million for a dog. All it's going to do is poop in your house. $1.6 million. I have a dog that I love. But if you stole it and said you want $100 for it, I'd say keep him. He likes to get up at 6 in the morning to go outside, just so you know. How about a baseball? Any sports fans? Any sports fans here? If I had a baseball for you, what would you give me for a baseball? $3, $4 probably at the store, at a sports store? What if that baseball was the ball, the 71st home run that broke the all-time home run record by Mark McGwire? What would it be worth then? Well, for most of us, still $3 or $4, right? But one sports collector paid $3 million for this baseball, for a round piece of white leather. How about this really nice cabinet? This is called a badminton cabinet. And for those of you, don't feel bad. I thought the same thing. You're thinking, wow, why would I put my badminton rackets and my birdies in there? It's called the badminton cabinet because it's the town that it was made in, Badminton in England. And this is just a cabinet. This is just a nice dishes and cutlery cabinet that you'd put in your dining room. Some of you are looking at it saying, I wouldn't put that anywhere in my dining room. That's ugly. Right? Someone else thought that cabinet was worth $36 million. $36 million to have a place to put your forks. Insane? Crazy? Stupid? But to that person, that's what it was worth to them. They loved that thing, and there was something about it they connected with, and they were willing to give to that. Last one. This is a painting by Picasso. It's actually only the top half of the painting. The bottom half we had to censor it and make it family friendly this morning. It's just a painting. This painting broke a record for the highest sold item in auction history, and it went for $106.5 million. $106.5 million for a painting. I mean, you could buy the Canucks for that money. Twice. Is Stephen even here? I made a joke at Stephen's expense. He's not even here. $106 million, people. I apologize if I'm overstating, but you get what I'm saying here, don't you? Some of us think that's crazy, but to that person, they were willing to spend that much, because to them, that's how much it was worth. To them, it was that valuable to them and their lives. We don't answer the question this morning of what worth or how valuable is Christ to you and your life and for what He's done in your life. We don't answer that with money, and that can be a part of it. The way that we answer that question is by the way that we live out our everyday, ordinary lives. The answer to that question is shown in your character. It's shown in our obedience. It's shown in our faithfulness. It's shown in our compassion, our generosity, our lifestyle. All of these things are the way that we answer that question this morning of how valuable truly is Christ to you. How much worth is He to you in your life? Not just showing up on Sunday, not just showing up and singing some songs and saying some nice words, but truly by the way that you live your life. How much worth is Christ to you in your life? What He's done. I love the end of that story. After she's created this crazy scenario, gotten in trouble by the men there and gotten rebuked by the disciples, and Jesus sticks up for this woman. And He says this in verse 6. "Leave her alone," Jesus said. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me." Verse 9, "Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." The gospel. Do you understand the significance to what Jesus is saying here? The gospel. The most important part, the most important story, the pinnacle part of why you and I are even here this morning, of the entire Christian faith, that gospel story, that important story, that one, when that one is told, they're also going to remember what this woman has done. And here we are, 2,000 years later, sitting in a church in Saskatoon, talking about what this woman did 2,000 years ago. My hope for you, my prayer for you this week is just simply this, that you would be maybe willing this week just to kind of do a little bit of self-assessment, maybe a bit of self-evaluation, and just ask that question to yourself. Of what worth really is God in my life, of what Christ has done for me? How valuable truly is that? By the way that I live my life, the things that by the amount of time and energy and things that I give, how much does that say or reflect truly the worth that God is to me? Maybe you would take some time this week and just ask that question to yourself And if need be, maybe a realignment needs, maybe to ask yourself, the way that you're living, is that a beautiful thing? Would that be something that Christ would say to you or of you, that you have done a beautiful thing to me? Why don't we pray to close? Heavenly Father, I want to pray for my friends here at Cornerstone as they go through this time of transition, God. I just pray that you would guide them. I pray for their leadership and their staff and all the people here, their search committee and those people involved, that God, that they would set aside their personal agendas and would just be willing to allow you to lead them and lead this church and for what it is that you've got next for the next chapter in this church's story, Father. I pray for that they would be faithful and allow you to do that. And then I pray too for each and every one of us, God, that you, as we ask that question about what kind of worth you are and how valuable to our lives, that you would reveal to us what that really does look like and things that maybe we need to do different or adjust, God, that we would be people that our lives have done a beautiful thing to you, Father. In your name I pray. Amen.